to another Today's Decay, where we celebrate births and beginnings of everything important since the dawn of time. It is October 21st, and here are all the dates that really rate. On this day in 1874, Charles R. Knight was born. I was going over some of my favorite museums in New York City the other day, and I failed to mention the Natural History Museum, which features tons of original paintings by Charles R. Knight, who's like the person who really defined what dinosaurs look like in our collective psyches, whether that's accurate to more modern scientific findings or not. Either way, I love his work. I do. Speaking of Natural History Museum, one of my favorite areas is certainly the Permian Age mammals. I find this like so interesting. Actually, he did depict some of those creatures. That basically, long story short, single cell organisms evolved into these enormous Dimetrodon type creatures, like fin backed, as wrongly labeled in probably the mid 1900s, or yeah, mid 1950s or whatever, probably wrongly labeled as like fin back dinosaurs. They weren't dinosaurs, they were Dimetrodons, and like that whole era were like almost mammals, if not mammals. And then there's a whole bunch of really fun, crazy looking creatures that are almost like funhouse mirror versions of dinosaurs you'd think they'd be. But it is like millions of years before dinosaurs. And in between, there was the Permian Extinction, where like some unbelievably large amount of creatures died off on the planet. They don't definitely know why. This wasn't like certainly an asteroid like the dinosaur, like that killed the dinosaurs, where we know like here's where it was, here's when it was, here's the effect to the planet. I mean, it's probably something similar, but it's much earlier in time, and just like everything died. And then from like very primitive organisms, life evolved into the dinosaurs that we know, which are like very similar looking to what the Permian Age mammals uh, resembled, which is wild. How does that happen? Ah, crazy to think about. And, taking that another step forward, if and when we wind up having like a significant extinction event for our species, who's to say that, like, again, from protozoa or whatever, new creatures don't evolve looking very similar to us, but like have wings or horns on their heads, or I guess I'm describing the purple people eater, aren't I? Whatever, you know what I mean. Something very similar to what we know, but like veering off in a different direction. I don't know. I like thinking about it. And Charles R. Knight, um, his artwork depicting what ancient creatures would have been like is the way I'm connecting with this. It's my visual. Maybe it's your visual too. What else? Edmund Hamilton, born today, 1904. Here I am reading Horror on the Asteroid by Edmund Hamilton. He was a Weird Tales era writer who did a whole bunch of science fiction and horror stories. Phantom Creep Theater, our horror host spook show troupe, did a whole space adventure show in Coney Island, like on the sideshow stage one year, where like our characters got shot up into space, and it was all these like ship's logs and like floating and zero gravity, and we did a live stage play of Horror of the Asteroid, because it's a really cool story, where this group of astronauts crash land on an asteroid, which turns out to have some sort of effect on their genes, where they wind up de-evolving into like primitive creatures on this asteroid in their spacesuits, and have to like figure out how to stay alive, even though they're like no longer the civilized people they were once upon a time. And hey, that kind of fits into the evolution thing we were talking about. I love when there's like connections, you know? Anyway, he did a whole bunch of great stories, very often with a sci-fi bent, and continued writing for decades. But this early to mid 30s stuff is some of my favorites. What else? Dr. Ross, born today, 1925. This is rock and roll, right? Sun Records, rhythm and blues. Should have been enormous, you know, on the lips and ears and minds and hearts of kids all across America and the world. But be it the race barrier at the time that it took Elvis to knock down these doors, it's a shame. Dr. Ross should have been enormous. I love his sound. Lux Interior, born today, 1946. I brought out another book here. This is the Wild World of the Cramps. If you ain't read this, you ain't read nothing. By Ian Johnston. This came in that box set that came out probably in like the early 1990s or so. And one of my really big takeaways, I mean, there's a lot of big takeaways from this book. For one, I mean, they give a whole list of like their favorite, like their top 10 movies, which I had to track down like everything when I was reading this. This is the Bible, truly, you know. Talks about how they met, Lux and Ivy. One of my real big takeaways here though was, I think he picked her up hitchhiking when they or he was like 35, something like that. And then at some point they decided to maybe start a band together. And I'm doing a really bad job at this. I haven't read this in like over 20 years. But my big takeaway was, and so they decided they're going to start a band together. They moved to New York because they see that the New York Dolls are a thing and they want to exist in that world. But too late, the New York Dolls have already split. And all that's left are the beginnings of the actual New York City punk movement in 76, 77, right? But yeah, they were attracted by what the New York Dolls were doing. And so they would be like the older people, you know, like everybody else was younger. If they were 35 if they were 35 when they met, when did they move to New York? Late 30s? I mean, this is a band who transcended everything that should have made sense, and yet it works so beautifully. And I love the idea that you can, I won't say reinvent yourself later in life, but like who's to say that you're the same exact person? You're never the same exact person throughout your life. You're always, I mean, I guess you could be if you don't pay attention to anything else and never listen to anybody or take anything in or internalize anything, you know, learn. But I love the idea that at 35, maybe at 39, they're like, hey, let's start this band. And then here's the rest of their lives. And who would have necessarily known this is what was going to happen 10, 15, 20 years earlier? Was this what they wanted? It doesn't mean that it's what they were trying to do, but just couldn't do it for several decades and finally figured it out. You never know what's around the corner. I love that. Another example, Jules Verne also didn't even like try his hand at writing until like he was about 35 or 40 or something like that. I love that, you know. You never know. What are later chapters in life, and what can you bring to it that maybe there's an intensity and drive that otherwise you just think, hey, I just get to do this and life's cool, which is great as well if things come easy to you. But for those that have to strive and really reevaluate their lives and their priorities, I like it. What else? 1959, on this day, the film A Bucket of Blood premiered. Roger Corman's take on Todd Robbins's Silent, White, and Beautiful, which is right here. This is a Todd Robbins Silent, White, and Beautiful hardcover from what year? It's like 1919, something like that. 1920. Close. Story being a mad sculptor who winds up killing people and putting them in his sculptures and then displays them as if it's his artwork. Starts right here. Todd Robbins with one D, not two. The second D is magic. The other Todd Robbins. So there you go. It's the whole day, October 21st. All sorts of exciting stuff for you to define your life by, should you want to. That's it. Until tomorrow. Goodbye.